everyone. We are the, as ever, good doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
And we are back with our continuing coverage of Netflix's sensational lady wrestling show, Glow. For those of you that are just joining us, we would really recommend you watch our first two videos. But
this isn't a show you can jump in midstream.
Yeah, this is not a show. We are also not doing episode by episode analysis, as you'll see from the title credits for this video. We're doing 5 episodes at a time and kind of taking a more big picture thematic overview of what's happening. And the reason we're looking at Glow is because we spend a lot of time talking about the representation of women in lots of professions, and also the diverse storytelling that does or does not happen around lots of things like gender and race and sexuality and ethnicity, pick a feature. But the reason we picked Glow is because they are actually one of the shows right now doing a fantastic job of showcasing the beautiful spectrum and rainbow that is the female experience in the world, both in terms of class and race and ethnicity and age. They're hitting all those points. So that's why we're talking about Glow. And today we've got into season 2 after the wonderful season 1, and we're talking about episodes 1 through 5 of season 2. Spoiler alert, we didn't love these episodes as much.
We didn't hate them.
I didn't hate them. There were still some really fantastic moments, which we'll highlight. But overall, I was kind of like, where did the momentum go from season 1? It was almost like the break, the fictitious break that happened in the show, like that there's a break between when they filmed their first episode and when they get picked up, like happened in real life, and then they lost all of the momentum from where they had taken the show in the last 5 episodes of the first season.
Yeah, I mean, it's super common in entertainment. We call it a sophomore slump for a reason. Like, first seasons, just like debut novels or first albums, are things that people spend decades thinking about sometimes. And the second season is usually, the second anything is usually a little rushed. And I think Glow feels that. They don't, I think at this point in time, know what to do with Sam's character.
Yeah, because they had sort of this really lovely quasi-redemption arc plot line in the first season, and in the second season starts out Ruth, is being desperate and cloying as usual, and so he lashes out at her, tells her to go keep everyone busy and boost morale. So the smart insightful woman that she is, she's like, oh, we need an opening credit roll, let's just go film it.
Yeah,
she goes and films something that's absolutely brilliant, and he gets like his knickers in a twist because she
heard the temper tantrum,
overstepped, and then he reverts entirely to everything that we don't like about Sam as a person for the rest of the first 5 episodes. Like, he doesn't really start to come back.
No.
Yet. So hopefully he does in the next, but I felt like there was a lot of character whiplash with Sam. Not that I expected him to be like sunshine and roses after the first season.
But where was the dude who lied and said he was her husband at Planned Parenthood? Like, that just felt like a really, that felt like a real, like, if I was Ruth, I would have crumbled even more, actually, at how he treated her.
Because he had treated her with such compassion and empathy in private, and then in public, like, absolutely tears her a new one. And then, like, I understand, maybe wanting to make sure that everybody knew you were in charge, but you're snorting coke all the time.
And maybe that's the answer. He's doing this because he's snorting more coke, and we're going to find out that it's upticked.
Maybe, because he wasn't at that first filming. Ruth did the whole production on that first filming in the hotel.
Yep.
And so obviously he's lashing out because he's guilty, because he knows that he's not been showing up. But yeah, it was just.
And like, there's lashing out. It just felt it. I mean, people revert all the time, right? In real life. Like, we're not saying that people don't. It just felt too extreme.
And then he didn't, like, it was a rubber band that didn't snap back.
Yeah. And maybe it does. We've got, at this point right now, what they have filmed and the story that they are telling, we have 15 more episodes.
Yes. So you know, I'm sure in the second half of the season, much like the second half of the first season, will kind of solidify some things. In terms of some of the issues they addressed in the first season, I think they did a really good job of spending a lot of time with Debbie again, but also she's one of the main protagonists. We didn't get a lot with Ruth in these first 5 episodes, but we get a lot about Debbie and her ongoing struggles. Her selling all her furniture in my house, I feel like it's something that in her house is something that I would do if I was pushed that far. So
yeah, you probably would. Yeah.
I would do something like, because that is petty, but also non-confrontational. So
very true. Yeah, I would have sued him at least 6 months prior. So yeah.
So I feel like that's on brand for me, like petty but non-confrontational. The episode with her and Tamay was wonderful. And we see how, and that's one of those things they've done really well, is talking about the intersection of gender and race for these women, and Tamay being a Black woman who is just doing everything she possibly can in her life and always has to get her son so that he can go to Stanford. And I thought they played that brilliantly, because
I loved her son.
I loved him because it would have been really easy for him to just be disappointed in her and to be upset at the stereotype of the welfare queen that she was playing.
Absolutely. And to like storm off and be like, I'm not dealing with you because you've tainted my new Stanfordness. Like, and instead he's just like, listen, it's disgusting, but I'm still proud of you.
Yeah. And like that to me was possibly other evidence
Special.
That it was written by a woman. Because the easy way out would have just been, oh, I'm so embarrassed, I'm so disappointed, like, how could you lower yourself to this level? When he realized, and he gets upset about it, but then he realizes that, like, she's just doing what she has to do to pay the bills, to support him, because that's what she's always done.
I think you pointed out offline, we were talking about, we'll go back to this, Debbie and Ruth, that one of Debbie's closing lines of this chunk is that feminism is about principles and life is about compromise.
Yeah.
And I think in some way that might be one of their unofficial taglines.
Yeah.
Because a lot of things are about principles and life is about compromise. And that's what that episode I think that's what the interaction around the welfare queen really is about.
Yeah.
And like, this is, at the end of the day, she has to eat.
Yeah. And this is the job
and this is an acceptable bending of her morals. Like,
yeah, and like they've still, I think, done a really great job of showing just how hard it is. Like when they were all chanting like "get a job," and at her, and I was like, when all she's ever done is like
get a million jobs,
work her ass off,
so
that she can live and support her family. And it's those small moments that the show does absolutely brilliantly. When Cherry gets really, really upset that they want to put a relaxer in her hair and that the people on the show don't understand how damaging that is, literally to her hair, but then also emotionally to her as a Black woman, and like what that would do. And they don't spend a lot of time on it. They don't beat us over the head with it, but you understand that that's a really important thing for her as a person.
Yeah, I'm also glad we're getting her back. I missed her.
Yes, I know. She's so good. She's so good. I'm looking at my notes to see, Ruth's desperation is painful to me in this whole first 5 episodes.
I find it adorably endearing, but that's because I've worked with about 400 teenagers exactly like her.
That you spend a lot more time in that world, and so I'm sure you know a lot of Ruth.
I was just like, oh, sweetheart, come here. Let me pet your hair. Like, it's all gonna be okay.
But speaking of Ruth's desperation, we should talk about what happens in the first couple of episodes with her and Debbie, and that we find out that Debbie is sabotaging intentionally her relationship with camera guy, who I can't remember his name.
Yeah, and like I said offline, like to me, Debbie is the person that I want to spend the least amount of time with, and yet the person who feels like I know 90 of her.
Yeah.
Like, and so, I mean, she is why I'd never want to live in Los Angeles, because I think in order to survive Los Angeles, you become Debbie. And that's fine. That's why I live on the other coast. But I am sure that there are people in this very similar situation who would choose to sabotage Ruth's life because they perceive that Ruth sabotaged theirs.
Yeah.
Very realistic. As a viewer, I have like almost zero time for that plot.
I felt so bad.
Like, oh, could we? Okay. Like,
and I mean, I think that's the way it is, right? Like, Ruth is the bad guy. Ruth is the heel on the show, like Glow in the rest.
Yeah.
And Debbie is the heel, like, outside of that.
In our show, yeah.
In our show, in the show that we're watching, the show of their lives. I totally forgot that she did that on purpose. But hopefully our Ruth will start to
stand up for herself too.
Stand up for herself a little bit more. She does at the end when her and Debbie have it out about whether or not Ruth should have slept with or intuited that she would sleep with the producer.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really key moment in the show, as like a whole big show of Glow and kind of what they're talking about. And I agree with you that, like, this idea that we can have a lot of principles, but reality means compromise, and reality means doing things that make you uncomfortable. Not that I'm advocating that Ruth should have slept with him. I don't think she should have either. I definitely would have been that person that would have stormed out of that room. And it was interesting to me because they set Debbie up, and you think Debbie is going to say to her, like, why didn't you just sleep with him?
Yeah.
But that's not what Debbie says. It's like, of course I don't think you should have slept with him, but you could have pretended that maybe you might have wanted to.
Yeah. And I thought, in regards to the whole show too, one of the things I think they do really well, and again, we talked about this offline, is that this show is 100% set in the early 80s.
Yeah.
And they are not trying to take conversations that we're having in 2019 and have in the fashions of the 1980s.
Yeah.
Like, that conversation that Ruth and they had about essentially Me Too and Harvey Weinstein is going to look a lot different, people having it now.
Yeah.
It did then. And the way that people reacted to Junk Chain and her lesbianism is going to look different now. And like all of those kind of things. And yet this show is grounded in when it was set.
Yeah.
And that allows us, I think, as viewers in our time to even more intentionally look at the things that we now take for granted.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, what does women's bodies being commodities really mean in Hollywood? What has it meant for a really long time? What does body ownership look like? What does sexuality look like? And we have these conversations in other pieces of art constantly, but I have appreciated Glow's like almost laser focus and how they're able to have it in a different way than almost any other piece of art I'm consuming right now. Yeah.
Because the other really interesting storyline that we get in these couple of episodes is the crisis that Bash is going through, because
Chris Lowell,
like, who knew that boy could act, huh?
I mean, he's just been adorable up to this point, but now
from Rob Thomas, but he has some really like emotionally vulnerable moments at the bar, in the gay bar.
Yeah, that was the face work. Like, I don't know what he was mad at.
He had some Elizabeth Moss level face acting happening there. And then when he's back in his room at his mom's house, his old room, and he like looks at himself in the mirror, I'm like, what are you thinking? What's going on? Why are you upset at Florian, I think.
Sure. That feels correct.
I think
eyeliner. Yeah.
Guy with eyeliner. Yeah. Is he dealing with his own potential sexuality issues? We don't know.
What he is realizing is that this relationship that was his best friend, he doesn't actually know that person, and that person is not his friend.
And it was more transactional than he was thinking it was.
And I think that's what the show wants us to think, because that's the whole thing with his mom's butler, who I think of as Kevin from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. He's Ryan Reynolds' husband. He's Andre Braugher. He's married to Andre Braugher on that show.
Oh, okay.
But I think that's what the show wants us to think, is that he's like falling apart over the transactionalness, and he's realizing that probably the only authentic relationship in his life is Carmen.
Yes. Oh, they're so cute.
Oh, I love
That's just BFFs. Yeah, I mean, I wrote down that he's like a lost, lonely little boy. That's
He
what I
is.
got in that last scene. Like, he doesn't know quite who he is.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most substantial relationships in his life, he's finding out, was possibly not a lie, but different than the relationship he thought he was having.
Yeah, and I think we're watching his Bash growing up.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. But it was surprising to me because I didn't really necessarily think we were going to spend that much time with Bash, but I'm glad we did. And it was, again, in the small ways that I was just like, oh, it's hit me in the feels.
I have a whole lot of time for lost little white boys trying to be better humans. I have a lot of time for it.
Me too. But that was one of the big, so we don't know where that's going, but I think definitely because that happened a lot in episode 5, we'll see in the next 5 episodes.
I was really afraid at the beginning of the whole series that they were going to make him and Ruth a romantic item.
Oh, interesting.
And they no longer have convinced me that that's where they're going.
Yes.
And I'm so glad because the more interesting story is him friends with Carmen.
Yes. Yeah, and I feel like this show consistently chooses
the more interesting choice.
The more interesting choice rather than the choice that they could obviously choose. Many other shows have chosen.
Yep.
And done completely fine in terms of ratings and popularity and, not thinking too critically about it. But it's almost like they sit down at these intersections and go, so what's the obvious path this character could take?
And what might the human do? And
then they pivot and they go, so that's what people are going to expect because they've been trained by half-hour sitcom shows to follow these types of characters. But how can we tell a different story? Which I will always be here for telling different stories.
Always. And it just, again, to me, only serves to feel more lived in.
Yeah, it's like, and when you were talking about how time specific it is in the 1980s, that lends to the authenticity. And
for sure. Yeah.
Because like we talked about this, but for those of you who don't watch The Handmaid's Tale, there was an instance where a character in The Handmaid's Tale, which is a dystopic, not contemporary American story, used a phrase that was very much like showing.
Like they read Huffington Post that morning.
Like they read that they are very much immersed in the current discourses we're having. And it took everybody watching it that I talked to out of that moment of authenticity. Because I was like, that character would never use that phrase.
Never said that.
That character would never be that, for lack of a better word, like woke.
Yeah.
And so what Glow does is it doesn't do that kind of, inauthentic social commentary. It's just, there was lots of racism and homophobia and sexism in the 80s, and it wasn't pleasant, and people said offensive things all the time that they did or did not know were offensive, and because it was 1984.
Yeah, and that's how this works. And so there's a couple times I read some review, and I can't remember where they were talking about a couple of the instances of like things they've never seen on television. And they said, and my favorite part is I get to look at people sometimes and go, that all still happens.
Yeah.
We just pretend it doesn't anymore.
Yeah, 100%.
So anyway, that's all I really got. What about you?
Nope, I'm done. That is the first 5 episodes. I'm a little nervous because they weren't as good as the first 10. But as you said, that is very typical.
Super common. And like, we went from, for me, like an A to a B. We didn't go from an A to a D.
Right.
So like, this isn't like some of the other art that we have talked about in our series, where like the first couple episodes were A+, and then Dietland, we end up somewhere around the failing grade. This is so much less, like, it was just so good.
Dietland ended up at the end of the alphabet, like.
Yeah, but like Veronica Mars did the same thing for me, which Veronica Mars, for anyone who has not heard me rant about this before, the first season of Veronica Mars is one of the most perfect seasons of television ever produced. Like narrative arcs, holes put together, performances, everything, top to bottom. To me, it's just beautifully constructed. Season 2, much less so. Season 3 was garbage. So we're not there yet.
No.
And I don't think we will, because I think this one knows what it's doing more.
Yes, and I think they'll get back on track as well in the next couple of episodes. So we're excited to see where it goes, where our favorite characters and not so favorite characters end up. So we will be back with our next video looking at the final 5 episodes of the 2nd season. But for now, we are the Good Doctors of Abby Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
Have a wonderful week, and we will see you all next time.
Can't wait. Bye.
Bye.